this is a good old-fashioned, like, Wyoming bash. You kind of need a little bit of everything. Like, you need a jacked-up truck that can bang down old logging roads. You need a buggy, this Polaris thing that can bash down roads that a truck can't get down. Then you need, your medical equipment, which is, a couple bags of all various type of things. You need a litter, which is basically a metal cage that's open on one side that we can put someone in, and then has a fat bike tire underneath. And it's made to wheel people down trails, essentially. Another thing we brought here is chainsaws, which turned out to be, maybe the key tool to this whole thing.
If a hunter falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, do they make a sound? Of course they do. They call for help and people come running. Sometimes those people run all night long, bashing through thick timber, cutting through fallen logs, looking over their shoulders for grizzly bears and trying to find a way through the terrible tangled maze of generations of downed timber. Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Fine Line. I'm Matt Hansen. People fall and get injured all the time. It's part of what Teton County Search and Rescue would consider their bread and butter response. This pretty much refers to any emergency call that includes an injury that's not life-threatening, has some proximity to a road, and allows the team of volunteers to go into the field on foot and bring someone home in the wheeled litter. Lickety-split, easy peasy. In our next story, however, a hunter happened to trip and fall in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the thickest timber you can imagine, just as the sun was going down in prime grizzly bear habitat during the elk hunt. Suddenly, what was once bread and butter is now a full-course meal in a very hot kitchen. If you're a rescuer, it's the kind of call that might get the hair to stand up on the back of your neck. On the bright side, it means they get to use just about every tool in their rescue toolbox, except for the helicopter. Because this rescue happens to take place in the middle of the night when the helicopter can't fly. What happens when a hunter falls in the forest? That's coming up next. This is The Fine Line from Backcountry Zero, an initiative from the Teton County Search and Rescue Foundation to help all of us understand how accidents happen and how we can prevent them in the future. We'll be right back.
Hey, I'm Colby Cox, co-founder of Roadhouse Brewing. We're stoked to bring you this episode of The Fine Line. As a paraglider, skier, dad, and homebrewer turned brewery owner, I chase the weird, the wild, and the wonderful. I believe in pushing boundaries, following fish, flying into the clouds, and coming back with a story. But the backcountry doesn't always let you write the ending. I've learned to respect the elements and know my limits. Still, stuff happens. That's why Teton County Search and Rescue means so much to all of us at Roadhouse. And when you do make it back, there's nothing better than swapping stories over a cold beer. You'll find us at the tap room or in downtown Jackson on the town square. Weeknights, weekends, there's never a wrong time to raise a glass to making it home. So stay safe out there, and remember, don't be late to happy hour. You can check us out on Instagram at Roadhouse Beer, or look at our website, roadhousebrewery.com.
Yeah, no, I remember it exactly. It was September 27th. Elk season opens on the 26th, so it was the second day of elk season. And I remember it being like a gorgeous September day, as pretty as it gets. The cottonwoods are golden. There wasn't a wisp of wind or a cloud in the sky. My name is Cody Lockhart. I'm from here in Jackson. Lived here my whole life. My day job, I run a investment management business, Wind River Capital Management. And I also work with my family to run our cattle ranch and beef business, Lockhart Cattle Company. I got a beautiful wife and two little kids. My son Callahan is 6 and my daughter Amelia is 8. And I've been a volunteer on the search and rescue team here for about 15 years. I'm the chief advisor of the team, which basically means I'm responsible to make sure we get our job done. I am in charge of leading the team and picking which direction we're going. And at the end of the day, my job is to make sure when someone like these folks calls 911 that we're prepared to do that and do our job as good as we can. was Friday night. It was date night in my house. And so Grandpa and Grandma had the kids for the night, which is, something that only happens a handful of times a year. And my wife and I were at a picnic. It was a picnic for the land trust at our park. And we just sat down. We were sitting at the table, having a conversation with the other folks that were there. And my phone goes off. And the phone call came in at 7:31. I think you guys called 911 at 7:28. So the way that works is, you call 911, and then every time someone calls 911 and dispatch figures out that it's going to be a search and rescue, they page the SAR leadership group, and then we kind of start working on the plan. So I stepped away from the table, because as I pretty much always do, like drop whatever I'm doing when I see SAR on my phone, and walked out of the picnic. And I was kind of just standing on a little bridge, listening to the story that the dispatcher was relaying to us. And right off the bat, I got a pretty good mental picture of what was going on. I knew exactly where this was. We were able to make a map kind of in our SAR mapping software, and I could see the point right away. And I knew exactly where it was. I'd been to this spot, and this trail they're referring to, like I'd been on it. It's not a trail. It's not doesn't show up on any maps. And the reason I knew about it is the outfitter that has this hunting camp. I grew up with him, and he showed me it one day. He told me where it was. And so I'd hunted it. I'd ridden it. And as we started to develop the story or the plan, I was like, it's dark. We're not going to be able to fly the helicopter, which is something that we, really rely on pretty heavily, especially for something remote like this. And so I was like, we have a rescue. I have some information here that's going to be super helpful. I know how to get here. I know this area. Without these handful of pieces of information, this is going to be much more challenging. It's a pretty remote place, in the valley. It's not a place that gets a lot of travel. The only time people really get back to Mount Leidy is during hunting season. Unique in a lot of ways for us from a rescue front. Like a lot of our rescues are on established, areas people are using a lot. Bike paths or rivers they're floating or, rock climbing areas. But that changes during hunting season because kind of the name of the game during hunting season is get to the place that no one else can get to or no one else is. And so where these guys ended up going was, about as difficult a place as you can find to get to, which is, again, the idea of a good hunting spot. It's the middle of nowhere.
Mount Leidy, Leidy, is named after Joseph Leidy, a prominent paleontologist and naturalist from the 1800s. Leidy, the scientist, is known for being the first person to identify and describe Bison antiquus, the ancient ancestor of today's bison. And he published the first work identifying dinosaur remains in the United States. Leidy the mountain is not the biggest or most prominent in Jackson Hole, as its summit tops out at just over 10,000 feet. Many people miss it altogether due to their attention being drawn to those crazy fancy Tetons lying in the exact opposite direction. But one of the unique things about Mount Leidy is that it sits in the corner of one of the wildest places left in the lower 48.
Where this incident took place at Mount Leidy, I've been going there for about 30 years. Off and on, as you guys are probably well aware, there's been a few years where you couldn't get in there for road collapses. Last year it was fires and so on and so forth. But it's a beautiful area we've always enjoyed and kind of feel like I know it like the back of my hand. But it was very, very enjoyable. And as far as work goes, I am in semiconductor sales and marketing, and I have been doing that for also about 34 years now. I'm Jeremy Dietz. I was born in Riverton, Wyoming, back in 1968. Moved out here to California, specifically to Morgan Hill in 2006. So I've been here for about, I guess that makes it 19 years, almost coming up on 20 years. And Charlie and I have known each other now for more than 10 years. My wife and I, we have 5 boys from age 19 now to coming up on 25. I've been hunting for more than 30 years. Obviously, as with I think most people from Wyoming, I would consider myself an avid outdoorsman and really enjoy getting out and enjoying the wilderness.
On the morning of September 27th, 2024, Jeremy and his crew of hunters woke up at 3:30 a.m. They were camped up one of the many former logging roads that wind around the base of Mount Leidy. They made some breakfast and then took ATVs as far as they could up a dirt road before they started walking, rifles slung over their shoulders. The group consisted of Jeremy's dad Jerome, who was in his mid-70s, his cousin Wyatt, who was 17, and Charlie Short, his longtime friend from California.
My name is Charlie Short. I live in Morgan Hill, California, which is just south of San Jose, California. I'm retired. I was a technical supervisor for a large casualty insurance company, doing mostly business insurance claims. I've been retired for about 4 years, married with a couple kids and a couple grandkids. I have a fair amount of hunting and fishing and backpacking experience and spent a lot of time in the outdoors. And so we set off in the general direction of Mount Leidy. We wanted to get up on a specific ridge so we could glass where we were going to go, and we had to bushwhack a long ways to get there. We got there sometime after light, got up to our place where we wanted to overlook some large meadows that were down there, and sat up there probably for an hour and a half or so. During that time, we did see a huge grizzly miles away walking across generally where we were ended up going. We did hear some elk. We didn't see any. As it got a little lighter, the weather was clear as a bell. It was cold, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. It wasn't projected to be any weather.
As they continued to ascend Mount Leidy, the terrain got tougher and tougher, and the sun got lower and lower in the big Wyoming sky. They began looking for the outfitter trail, hoping it would ease their progress.
And it seemed to get worse and worse in terms of heading towards a trail. We were getting into higher timber and that kind of thing. It was starting to get dark, not real dark, but it was starting to get there. We came across a kind of a clear cut, and we decided that I would go downhill and Jeremy would go uphill in this clear cut to see if either of us could locate the trail. Jeremy headed uphill and I headed downhill. I probably got 250 yards or so and must have tripped. It wasn't a dramatic fall or anything, but I tripped forward on a downhill slope and fell leading with my left knee, and it hit a tree, about as good as you can. And I knew when I hit the tree that I was in trouble. I fell against this tree. As it turns out, my left kneecap had been broken in half. I yelled for Jeremy, who thought I found a trail or found a bear, but he came over, and I was basically yelling help, which I'd never done before in my life. Jeremy helped me up, and I kind of made an assessment as to whether I could limp my way out of there. I thought maybe I could straighten my leg and limp out. I took 1/2 step and collapsed. The knee doesn't work when you don't have a solid kneecap. And I knew at that point we were in some trouble. I worked my way. We were on a pretty good slope, and I backed myself up to where we were sort of level and a little level area. By now it's getting fairly dark. And Jeremy asked me, should I call 911? And I really didn't hesitate. I knew we weren't going to get out on our own. Jeremy started calling 911, and as he was doing it, I said, Jeremy, I'm going to fire my gun 3 times to alert the advance group. So when I stood up, I put my hand on my kneecap, and it felt kind of numb, and I could feel that there were 2 separate sections of the kneecap, and I could put, there was a clear fault line in the middle of it. And I knew I was hurting, but I had no other injuries. It wasn't a huge dramatic fall. It was just maybe a 3 or 4 foot fall right directly to the knee. But I knew that after trying to get up and walk, there was no way I was going to be walking out of there.
I immediately tried to pick him up and see if I could somehow brace him and walk with him, or if I could somehow pick him up, and I got him upright, and he just kind of fell right away. He knew there was no way he could put any weight on his leg, so it was fairly evident from the beginning that I was either going to have to carry him out of there or call somebody to come and get us out. So, and carrying really wasn't an option because there was no way that I could pick him up that wasn't going to cause pain to his leg. That's when we started going through it. So I would say that I was sufficiently concerned at that point for safety, because I knew it was getting dark. Again, we're in Grizz country, which was not settling at all. and and I also, as Charlie mentioned, we decided to call 911, and I looked at my phone, and I think it was down to about 40% for battery power. And when I called search and rescue and started communicating with them, and they asked for my coordinates, normally you can get that off of Google Maps and stuff like that, but because the signal was inadequate, I couldn't get the coordinates off my phone, and my battery was starting to go dead on my phone by that time. As Charlie also mentioned, very fortunately, I had my GPS watch, which I use for tracking my miles and triathlons and everything else. And so I was able to get the coordinates off of that and communicate, which I think made the whole thing at least somewhat easier. I know it was still probably difficult for Cody and the team to find us.
First problem is, how do we get there? And as these guys described how they got there, involves trucks and four-wheelers and then foot and, no trails, or at least when you look on the map on your GPS, there's no trails. And so it's a real challenge to how to get there. And there was a few other folks around SAR headquarters that are, savvy with maps, savvy with the area. And so then we kind of have a debate of, hey, what's the best way to get there? Do we take this road and then bushwhack through here? Or do we try to find this trail? And, the first main problem was, how do we get there? Some of that dialogue or conversation was going as, me and 3 or 4 other members of the SAR team jumped in the truck with the Razor, which is basically a Polaris-made dune buggy type thing that we've retrofitted to be able to fit a litter or backboard in there. And so as we're driving down the highway headed up there, and again, it took us, over an hour of truck time to get to where we could even start. We kind of are working through the plan and talking through logistics, who's going to do what, to try to be as organized as we can as we, head up the mountain. This is a good old-fashioned, like, Wyoming bash. You kind of need a little bit of everything. Like, you need a jacked up truck that can bang down old logging roads. You need a buggy, this Polaris thing that can bash down roads that a truck can't get down. Then you need, your medical equipment, which is, a couple bags of all various type of things. You need a litter, which is basically a metal cage that's open on one side that we can put someone in, and then has a fat bike tire underneath. And it's made to wheel people down trails, essentially. Another thing we brought here is chainsaws, which turned out to be, maybe the key tool to this whole thing. And then in this case, because of bears, like bear protection, whether that be bear spray and guns. So just kind of all the things that these guys would need, we basically brought the same stuff, maybe plus a little more medical gear. And then there's a fair amount of technology involved, and we can maybe get into that later. Important that we have really good radios, which we did, and they work great on this rescue. And our phones, which have amazing mapping software where we kind of know where everybody is. So, we drive down the highway, which is like 40 or, 50 miles of highway miles from town to where you turn off. And then we rattle down the dirt road for, a half hour or so. And it's a pretty good dirt road at this point. Also, kind of important to note, there's a major wildfire raging on Togety Pass, which is, the fire is maybe 10 miles from here, but it's affecting where we're at. Like, the firefighters have been going in here. Roads are closed that maybe wouldn't normally be closed. And so we're discovering that as we go down the road. There's some locked gates that aren't normally locked. Luckily, we have keys and codes to most of those gates. So we start opening random gates and rattling down roads. And then we rattle down the road with the pickup truck with a big, trailer with a buggy behind us. And we kind of drove to a spot where, like, well, we drove as far as we can get. Like, we're not drivable anymore. And so at that point, we unload the Razor and start, rattling down the roads where they were a road at one time, but, a lot of trees have fallen on them. No one's driven down them in, years or decades in some cases. And so to start, we're using the saw to, like, cut our way in, cut the road out, so we can get as close as we can to make the foot job or the hiking part of this as small as we can. So, truck as far as you can get it, Razor as far as you can get it, and then we're on foot after that.
And I think it's important to maybe point out to people that Mount Leidy, or the base of it, is just thick timber, correct?
Yeah, and Jeremy and Charlie both described this, but it's north facing, where these guys were north facing. And so in the valley, that's where the trees grow. And, at this elevation between, 7,000 and 10,000 feet on north face, you'll find the thickest timber in the valley. And these guys found, about the thickest north facing timber patch that you can find. And, this particular spot hasn't burned or been logged. And so, to describe the kind of topography, it's a pretty steep slope. At places it's 30, 40, probably 50 degrees at some slopes, maybe more than that on Mount Leidy proper. And then it's so thick a timber. I mean, there's big live trees, but the ground cover is like you took a box of toothpicks or matches and just threw them on the ground, and it's just dead timber everywhere. And so to get through this timber, you're not walking, you're crawling or looking for a way where you can get 10 steps without not going over a log. But you're log climbing kind of the whole way to get to where they were. And that's how they got there. They log climbed down, and Charlie just took a wrong step on one of those logs, and that's how he ended up, buggering his knee up. So back at headquarters, a good friend of mine, like the best map guru maybe in the world, I'd say. His name's Alex Norton, and he's drawn lines on maps trying to show us the simplest way to go in there, because there's no roads, but there's some meadows. There are opener patches in the timber where, like, if you bushwhack through there, it's a lot better than if you bushwhack through the thick timber. And so I had my phone in my hand kind of the whole time trying to figure out where to go. But as soon as we took the razor as far as we could go, probably took it a little further than it was supposed to go or could reasonably go. And then Brooke Yeomans and I jump out of the razor, and we're like, all right, we're going to try to get to these guys. Let's see if we can actually figure out a way to get there.
We kind of yelled ourselves together so they could find out where we are. I was really happy when they got there. And as I say, Cody and Jeremy took over the role of, okay, let's figure out how to get out of here. And Brooke took over the role of, medical triage, and he did a great job. And yes, it was just a matter of, okay, well, let's let the professionals figure out how to get out of here. And we just kind of fed the fire and waited, and ultimately they had a plan.
And I looked at Jeremy, and I was like, hey, you know the area well. And he's like, yeah, I know what's going, I generally do. And I said, come with me. And so I think I was only on team with Charlie for a minute or two. And then Jeremy and I said, grab your gun, grab your pack. Let's start trying to figure out how to get out of here. And so first thing we did, Jeremy said, he's like, I think this outfitter trail is above us. And so Jeremy and I went uphill. It was quite a ways uphill, but we did end up finding the trail. Yeah. And I'm on the radio with the rest of our team, and they can also see where I'm at. Like our GPS software allows, like, if I have service, they can see where I'm at, and I can see where the other teams are at down below us. And so, basically our first feedback was, don't come in the way we came in. It was tough. And the next group coming in had to bring in the litter, had to bring in more gear. And so they weren't going to be able to be as nimble and just crawl through the trees like we did. So Jeremy and I kind of walked up and down this trail for a while. I'm coordinating with the rest of the crew. Hey, I think you can get the razor over, the next drainage over, and maybe try to come in from this angle. I remember Jeremy and I hiked to a little lake. And at this point, I'd lost cell service, so the rest of the team couldn't tell where I was at. And but there was a very recognizable little lake or pond on the map. And I remember I got to this pond. I was like, here, I'm at this lake. It's the only little lake right here. Get yourself to that. And then once you get there, go down this trail for 3/4 of a mile and had, walked them in from there. And so Jeremy and I were able to kind of walk the rest of the crew into us. So we had the whole cavalry there to help us sort out the mess.
And how long did it take for them to get up to meet you with the litter?
It took a while. It took another hour or two, if not more, to get everybody else up there. And we, folks took different ways. Part of it was us guessing, like, we think this way's better. I don't know if it turned out to be better. I think we all ended up on that same north face full of timber, and there wasn't there's just not an obvious way. We were hoping, Jeremy and I, that if we found this trail, which we did, and if we could get if we get Charlie and that litter to that trail, then we could buzz them out. It took us to a spot quite a ways away from our razors. It took us to a different road, but it was an easier way out. It was a longer way out, but it was better. But Jeremy and I figured out, like, we couldn't get Charlie uphill that far. You know, it was quite a ways uphill from where he was hurt, you know, a half mile or something like that. And it was through just thick timber, and it's like 40 degrees. And I was like, it's going to take us 3 days to cut enough, you know, do enough chainsaw work to make this doable. And it was steep enough that, like, just the physics of pulling him uphill would have involved, you know, lots of ropes and pulleys, and it was not the option. And so I relayed to our headquarters, to Alex Norton. I'm like, you got to find us a way downhill. We can't, this trail's not going to work. You got to find us a way downhill. And so as we were packaging Charlie and kind of once the wheel litter got there, we were getting him in there. The incident command crew, the folks back at headquarters, had kind of worked out a plan for the simplest way for us to go downhill and get him out.
Had you considered maybe spending the night and waiting for morning to get the helicopter in there? Was that
for
a
sure?
consideration?
Yeah, I would say that's among our SAR group, there was lots of dialogue of, like, you know, like, all it took to do this rescue was some, like, can-do attitude and a bunch of, you know, man and woman power. But there was a bunch of people, there was definitely some voices saying, like, this might be a wait till the morning, get the helicopter in here, pull them out on a line below the helicopter. And that might be safer for us, safer for Charlie, because this is a challenging enough thing. And I didn't feel that way. I was like, we got this. We can get him out of here. We're just going to have to cowboy up and do it. And I remember asking Charlie, I said, you know, Charlie, here's the two options. We can, you know, try to keep you warm all night and wait for the helicopter in the morning, or we can, you know, throw you in the middle of this timber patch. It's going to be rough, and it's going to be, you know, a lot of tossing you around, because he's strapped to this thing as we're bashing through the timber. And Charlie's like, I want out of here. I'm like, all right, well, I agree. We should get you out of here. I think that's how that went, Charlie, if you remember that.
Yeah, no, you're right. The thought of getting on a line and, you know, flying in a helicopter like Peter Pan didn't really appeal to me. The ground transportation sounded a much better way to go.
If I could just add a couple of things, I was definitely respectful of watching Cody and the team go through the instant assessment and prioritization, and it was clear that they were very well experienced about this. You know, when Cody and I crested the hill to get back to that trail, it was very evident to him that there's no way we were going to roll him up that hill or cut through enough timber to get him up there in any reasonable amount of time, even if we could do it. And then when we walked out to that lake, and I think locally we call it Mirror Lake or Mirror Pond or something like that. It's got a beautiful scene where there's a rock slide. It often has snow in it, reflects beautifully on the lake. So although it was pitch black, you couldn't see any of that. So we walked back in there, and Cody was in constant communication with the team, trying to figure out the maps. And then, you know, about a half mile before where we came up and crested the hill there to get onto the trail, he's like, well, maybe we should work our way down through the timber here to see if there's an easier way to get to them. And boy, we got down in there about 5 minutes, and like, there's no way in hell we're going to bring him out of here. So it was a constant assessment of that. And then, you know, the other thing that was I don't know if it was a factor or not for whether or not the helicopter come in, but as Cody mentioned previously, there was that wildfire going on. You know, if the wind shifted and the smoke came into our area, it probably would have complicated things too. So there's so many factors that have to be considered and come up with quick decisions during that type of scenario. It was impressive watching Cody and the team go through that and come up with ultimately the right decision, the safest decision to get Charlie out of there safely.
With the rescue team finally set up to get Charlie out of the backcountry, the clock read 2:30 in the morning. It had been nearly 24 hours since Charlie and the rest of his hunting party rolled out of bed. And though there was light at the end of the tunnel, their day was not over yet. That's next, after this short break.
Show your support of this podcast by becoming a friend of The Fine Line. With a one-time donation of $50, we will send you our brand new Fine Line ceramic camp mug, the TCSAR handkerchief named after our favorite chocolate lab and handsome dog model, Hank, plus an assortment of TCSAR and Backcountry Zero stickers. Since 2016, the Fine Line podcast has been building backcountry safety awareness and celebrating the dedication of first responders through comprehensive interviews and compelling storytelling. Show your support today by becoming a friend of the Fine Line. Visit our online store at tetoncountysar.org and look for the patron packages. Thanks for being a friend of the Fine Line.
Yeah, so we got him in the litter, and we decided we were going downhill. And I have good radio comms with Alex at headquarters. It's 50 miles away, but we have these great radios. They have what's called Wyoming Link, and they're these digital radios. And if you have service, I can talk to them. And so I'm like, Alex, find us a way out. And my phone was working enough at this point that he's like, I drew two ways out. There's the green line and the yellow line. He's like, from my vantage point, like looking at the satellite view of the land, like there's, this is the thinnest trees possible or whatever. And so I was like, all right, we're following the green line. From what I saw on the ground and from what you saw at your computer screen, I think that works.
Okay, so it's probably just me. But does this remind anyone else of a certain sci-fi flick from the late 1990s? As in The Matrix? And how Neo and Morpheus and Trinity would use their cell phones to communicate with Tank, who's back at headquarters on the spaceship, and he can see their location to help them find the safest and best route to a payphone that they can use to escape Agent Smith and his goons? I mean, it's not exactly the same, but sort of. Okay, back to the story.
So, 2 or 3 people get on this litter, and again, it's a bike tire or with a backboard on top, and then there's, a person behind with the set of handles and a person in front with the side of handles, and then you can get people on the side. And we just started moving, and, we went 6 feet, and we hit a big log jam, and I got in front with the chainsaw, and I kind of had the map in one hand and the chainsaw in the other, and we get to a tree, I'd start cutting it or, whacking it just enough so we could get through it, and then we'd get, 5 or 6 people on the litter and lift it over the tree or throw it through there, and we just kept doing that all day, all night long, and I'd follow the map, and, we'd go 50 yards till we hit a big obstacle, and then we'd start cutting and, problem solve that, and we just did that all night long. I'm sure for Charlie it was a little bit petrifying, just banging around, and we never tipped him all the way over, but
it really was not. It was. I had the easiest job of the whole crew, just lay there and be quiet, and there was enough people to make it a very comfortable ride down for me.
Yeah. So we just did that for as long as it took, a few hours of that, and we'd find some good going. We'd find a little meadow and we'd make some good progress. And then we'd be like, all right, well, we have to go over this next little knoll and do a timber patch. And we did that. At the same time, we had another team that we were able to communicate with and said, hey, get the razor or get the buggy to right here. We think we can come out right here. And they did. And ultimately we ended up meeting up with them, met up with the buggy. And, we strapped Charlie inside. And then from that, then on it got simpler. We moved him from the buggy down the road a ways and to the truck and, started working our way towards town. Was the progression of things. I think I just maybe try to draw the picture of you of like on this rescue, like many rescues, the team is like a big accordion. It stretches out. Like everybody stretches out. There gets to be, 3 or 4 different groups. There's the group at headquarters, there's the group at the trailhead, there's a group driving the razor, there's a group running up the mountain, and so there's 4 or 5 different groups and that spread out, and at the kind of the peak of the rescue, everybody spread out all over the mountain, and then as we start coming back, the accordion comes back together and we all pull back together, and then kind of as it starts to all come together, we're all at the same spot at the same time with all the stuff, all the gear.
They loaded us in a truck from the Polaris. We fortunately went right by our camp, dropped Jeremy off, and I think 3 or 4 people we were in the truck with. Cody was one of them, I think, and Brooke was another. They were nice enough to take me to Jackson Hospital.
A normal rescue like this, like once we get you off the razor, get you back to a main road, we'll have an ambulance waiting for you, and try to get you a little higher medical care than we can give in the in a pickup truck. But the dirt road that was pretty darn rough to get to where you guys were, and we didn't feel like getting the ambulance down there would help anybody out. It'd just make the ride slower and beat the ambulance up. And we were going back to town anyway, so we're like, Charlie, we'll just give you a ride, and this is close enough to an ambulance to get you to the hospital. And by this point, Charlie's in pain, and he's definitely wore out, but we're like just talking about our kids and our lives and trying to be guys bouncing down a road in a pickup truck.
It was a non-comminuted displaced fracture of the left patella, which is the kneecap, and it was split in half, basically, if you can imagine your kneecap getting broken in half. They x-rayed me, told me I was going to need surgery. He gave me a splint, a brace, a full leg brace, some crutches, a couple pain pills, set me on my way, and I waited till about noon the next day for Jeremy to gather our camp, come get me, and we headed our 2-day trek back to California from there. I spent five months in active physical therapy. Well, I've been doing this, I've been hunting like this my whole life, and some of it by myself, some of it with people, in some of the wildest conditions, and you think, well, thank God I never got hurt, never fell, never was with anybody who was injured. It was the first time that I was in a position where I needed help, and I appreciate the fact that you need more than yourself out there. Having a partner with you could really save your bacon, and it did in this instance. One thing I wish I had that I didn't was a satellite radio, something that had a little bit of communication. I would have been in trouble if Jeremy hadn't been able to get through and we hadn't been able to get our coordinates and all that kind of stuff. I think we had adequate equipment. It would have been nicer to freshen up our walkie-talkies and freshen up our radios or our phones before we got out there. You can only carry so much, first aid equipment and that kind of stuff. And we did everything, we carried everything we thought we needed. It just was an unfortunate accident to occur in a really remote area.
I remember I told Charlie on the way home, I was like, I promised my 6-year-old boy that I'd pick him up to take him elk hunting in the morning, pick him up from grandpa's and we'd go hunting. And I remember I got home right about the time it was to go hunting, and I was like, Cal, we're going to do this tomorrow. I'll take you hunting tomorrow. We'll go find the elk tomorrow. But I don't have it in me to go bash around in the woods anymore. All night. Basically got home as the sun was rising, as Charlie said.
In terms of lessons learned and everything like that, I would just say I think that we did just about everything we could correctly in this case. But my advice to people was not, no matter how many times you've gone out and done this, and no matter how much experience you have in the wilderness, don't get overconfident that all of your stuff that you have packed is going to be sufficient. Make sure you check the functionality of everything that you take with you, and plan for extra, right? In other words, don't just take one bottle of water thinking you're only going to be out, for half a day or something like that. You may end up being out there much longer than that, and you should make sure you double up on your provisions and your rations to make sure that you're going to get through it. So, and I'm also would reflect, like Charlie said, I've heard obviously of search and rescue teams. I was unfamiliar with also their funding and how well organized they really are, and just proud of the fact that you have people out there that volunteer their time and do this, and really help people that are in dire need like this. And it's a testament to humanity as far as I'm concerned. So.
Yeah, I'd just add, this is just one of those things that happens, I've been in this same spot. I've been doing the same thing. This is just what hunting looks like. You go try to find a place in the middle of nowhere where no one else is around, and hopefully the critters are there. And, sometimes you trip. We all do that. And sometimes you hit a tree, and Charlie just hit the wrong tree at the right place or wrong place. And, had this injury. So I can say from the SAR standpoint, we all had complete empathy and understanding of yep, this is just one of those things that happens, and it's our job. We volunteered for it to help people out of this, and we're happy to and proud to get to do it. And I'd also just mention I'm proud to get to tell this story today, but there was also there was 15 people on this rescue that were doing an equally important job at different levels here, and it took kind of that whole accordion, or that whole chain of folks, to make sure it all came together and we could get Charlie off the mountain.
And that's our story about when a hunter falls in the forest. Thank you so much to Charlie Short and Jeremy Dietz for sharing their experience, and to Cody Lockhart and the entire search and rescue team for their incredible service. If you would like to support Teton County Search and Rescue volunteers, go to tetoncountysar.org/donate. You've been listening to The Fine Line, a podcast from the Teton County Search and Rescue Foundation to help build backcountry safety awareness and appreciation for our local first responders. Thank you to Roadhouse Brewing Company for sponsoring this episode. Our theme song is by Anne and Pete Sibley, accompanied by music from Ben Winship. The editing and sound are by Melinda Binks. The original cover art is by Jen Reddy. This interview was recorded in the studios of KHOL 89.1 FM in Jackson. I'm your host, Matt Hansen. Please subscribe to The Fine Line wherever you get your podcasts, and if you enjoy it, please leave us a review. We'll see you next time.